And welcome to Uncle Matt Online Academy. Today we want to continue with our discussion on index notation, and we are going to be learning how to find the index notation of a negative power, that is a number that has a negative power. How do we get the index notation of it? For instance, if we have 2 raised to power minus 2. You remember that in our last lesson, we talked about we considered only numbers without negative in their power. So today, if the power is negative, how do we get the index form? That is what we are going to look at now. So for this one, that is 2 raised to power minus 2, whenever we see the power and it has minus, the first thing we do is to write 1 over, then we convert the minus to power. So 2 raised to power minus 2 is going to be 1 over, then we convert this minus, remove this minus here, and write it as 2 raised to power 2. Now there is no minus again here. Now with this one, now we can now do for the expanded form of this, which is now equal to, the 1 is still there, 1 over 2 raised to power 2, the expanded form of it is 2 times 2. So what it means is that the expanded form of 2 raised to power minus 2 is equal to 1 over 2 times 2, 2 times 2. So this is the answer. Another example, if we have 3 raised to power minus 4, 3 raised to power minus 4, how do we convert this to the expanded form? It has minus. So the first thing we are going to do is to write 1 over, then we convert it to positive. So this is going to be 1 over, then 3 raised to power 4, 3 raised to power 4. Now we find the expanded form of this, keeping the 1 on top intact. So we have 1 over 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. That is 3 coming into 4 times. So this becomes the answer. So 3 raised to power minus 4 is equal to 1 over 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 in the expanded form. 5 raised to power minus 3. In the same way, the first thing to do is to convert the minus to positive. And for us to do that, we write 1 over the number raised to power positive. That is 1 over 5 raised to power. Now the 3 will not have any negative. Now this is now equal to, the 1 on top still remains intact. Then the 5, we find the expanded form of it by looking for the number of times it is occurring, which is 3. Now it becomes 5 times 5 times 5. So this is the answer for 5 raised to power minus 3. Now please note that it is only when this minus is on top as power. It is not when we have something like minus 3 raised to power 4. This is not the same thing. It is only when this minus is on top of the number. But if the 3 is at the back of it, this means minus 3 raised to power 4. They are not the same thing. You should be very careful to know when the minus is just at the back of the number and when the minus is on top of the number as a power. So with this one, we are not doing it that way. But with this, with the one minus on top, we find the inverse. The inverse is 1 over then the number raised to power positive. So if you are given, if we have minus 3 raised to power 4, I said that it is not the same thing as putting the minus on top. So this one is going to be the same thing as, this one is minus 3 coming into 4 times. There is no 1 over. So this one is just minus 3 times minus 3 times minus 3 times minus 3. So you can see the difference. When the minus is on top, you have to divide the number by, you have to write 1 then over the number raised to power positive. But if the number is just at the back of the number, you just find the number of times the negative, the number is occurring by looking for the power that it contains. Now, just like the one we did in the previous lesson, where we talked about index of alphabets and index of alphabet and number combined, we can also have index of negative numbers or negative value that contain both alphabet and numbers. For instance, we can have a raised to power minus 2. A raised to power minus 2. This one is going to be 1 over a, then we convert the 2 to positive. A raised to power 2. Now, which if we find it in the expanded form, we leave the 1 intact. So we have 1 over a times a. That is a coming into 2 times. If you have c raised to power 4 minus 4, it is going to be equal to 1 over c raised to power 4, which is equal to now 1 over c coming into 4 times. That is c times c times c times c. So this is the answer. Now, what if we have different alphabets combined, like A and B? Now, let's assume that we have A raised to power minus 2, and then we have B raised to power 3. B raised to power 3. Here we can see that this A has minus 2, minus, but B does not have any minus. So here we are combining negative and positive. We are working with negative, the one with negative and the one without negative. Now see how we are going to do it. It is going to be equal to, we work for 2 of them differently. This one that has negative, we find the 1 over the number raised to power positive. That is the inverse of it. So A is now 1 over a raised to power 2, this thing 1 over a raised to power 2, that is for this one, and then for b, we still write it as b raised to power 3. Now here we have converted everything to positive. Now we find the expanded form of 1 over a raised to power 2, and then the expanded form of b raised to power 3, which is now equal to 1 over a times a, and then b, this is times b times b times b. Now this is equal to this b that is standing on its own, means anything that is standing on its own is over 1. So this is b over 1 is the same thing as writing it as b over 1, b over 1. So in this case, we can also say what is under times what is under, and the one that is on top times one that is on top. So this will give us b times b times b over, that is, we take this b, we times everything by 1. Anything times by 1 is 1. So it becomes b times b times b times b. Then a is under, so we put the ones that are under, which is a times a times a. So this is the expanded form of it. We can also leave it this way, but to solve it and show that you know what you are doing very well, you can times everything that is on top and put them on top, and times everything that is down and put them down. Like this one, you times this a and this a, and times by 1 and times by 1 and times by 1. Anything you times by 1 will still give you the same thing. So under, we are going to have only a times a, and for up, we have 1 times b times b times b. So anything times by 1 will still give you the same thing. So on top, we are going to have b times b times b, and that is this thing we have here. So whether you leave it this way, or you get to this way, this point, you will still get your full mark. Now let's look at another example. If we have d raised to power minus 3 times b raised to power minus 3, a raised to power 2. Now this is equal to, for d, it has minus power, so we write inverse of it, which is 1 over then d raised to power positive 3. 1 over d raised to power 3, then a raised to power 2. Now this is equal to, we find the expanded form of 1 over d raised to power 3 and the expanded form of a raised to power 2, which is now equal to 1 over d times d times d. Then for a is equal to, this is times a times a. Anything standing on its own, like this a, is still the number over 1. So a over 1, a over 1. So that we have something on top here and something below. So we have numerator and denominator, numerator and denominator. Since we have numerator and denominator this side, we make everything to be similar. Now with this one now, we can times everything that is on top and then times and divide it by everything that is down. The ones that are on top is this one, then A, and the one that is below is this D, and this D, and this one, and this one. So when we times everything, we are going to get A. 1 times A is A times A. So we have A times A over the one that is down is D times D times D. Then times by 1, it will still give you the same thing. So we have D times D times D. So this is how to get this. Now, what if two of the alphabets have negative powers? For instance, if we have a raised to power minus 2 and b raised to power minus 3, the other one we have one of them as negative and one of them as positive. Now, what if two of them are negative? They have negative powers. It's still the same way. Very simple. We first of all find the inverse of each of them. For A, it is 1 over a raised to power 2, and for B, it is 1 over b raised to power 3. So, with this, we find the expanded form of a raised to 1 over a raised to power 2 and the expanded form of 1 over b raised to power 3. For a raised to power 2, we keep the 1 intact, 1 over a coming into 2 times a, and for b, we have 1, we keep it intact, 1 over b coming into 3 times, which is b times b times b. So this is now equal to, we put everything that is on top. Here we have a numerator. The one on top is called numerator. This is numerator, and this one is denominator. This one numerator, this one denominator. So we times the numerator by numerator and denominator by denominator. So we have what is on top is 1 times 1, which is 1. Then what is down is a times b times b times b. So this is the answer. 1 over a times b times b times b. So this is the answer. So this is how to find the inverse or index form of a negative power. I also believe that this is very, very clear. Now let's look at the assignment we have. Okay, so in the assignment, we first of all start with number 1, find the expanded form of b raised to power minus 5 a raised to power 2, a raised to power minus 3, c raised to power minus 9, p raised to power minus 4, q raised to power minus 2, 2 raised to power 4, c raised to power minus 8, 5 raised to power minus 2, and b raised to power minus 4. I believe you can do this very well. Then here we find the index form of this number. This is just working way back. I've shown you how to get the expanded form. So you just convert the expanded form here to the index form and get it in the negative form. For instance, if we have b times b over a times a, what it means is the one that is on top, we find the index of it, which is equal to b raised to power 2, and then the one that is down is, we find the inverse of it, it is a raised to power 2 also. Now what it means is that is equal to b raised to power 2. What we can times to get this, b raised to power 2 over 1 times 1 over a raised to power 2. Because if you times the one that is on top, this 2, a raised to power 2, b raised to power 2 times 1, that will give you this b raised to power 2. And if you times 1 times a raised to power 2, it will give you the one that is below, which is a raised to power 2. So this is equivalent to this. So b times b raised to power 2 over 1 is the same thing as b raised to power 2. And then 1 over a raised to power 2. What can we convert to get 1 over a raised to power 2? It is when we find the inverse of a raised to power minus 2. So this 1 over a raised to power 2 is the same thing as a raised to power minus 2. So this is how to work it back to get the inverse form of this index form expressed, the expanded form of this. Let me give you more example on this. If we have another number like b times b times b over a times a, this is going to give us b times a again. This is going to give us b raised to power 3 and then a raised to power 3. That is if we find the index of the one on top and the index of the one below. Now this is going to be, what can we times to get b raised to power 3 on top? Note that a over b, anytime you see something like this, a over b, it is equal to, it is the same thing as writing a over 1 times 1 over b. So anytime you see a fraction, the one on top, you can separate two of them by using a multiplication, by saying the one on top divided by 1, and then the one below, 1 over the one below. So the one on top is this a. So you say a divided by 1, you separate two of them with multiplication, then multiply by 1 divided by the one below. So if you have 2 over 4, it is the same thing as saying the one on top, which is 2 divided by 1, then you separate two of them by multiplication, times by 1 divided by 1, the one below, which is 1 over 4. 1 over 4. The same way, if you have 1 over 2, it is the same thing as saying 1 over 1, that is the one on top, which is 1. You divide it by 1 over 1, then separate it by multiplication, times the one below, 1 divided by 8, which is 1 over 2. The same way, if you have 5 over 6, it is the same thing as saying the one on top divided by 1, 5 divided by 1, then separate with multiplication, and then say the one below, 1 divided by the one below, which is 1 divided by 6. 1 divided by 6. So here now, here we have b raised to power 3 divided by a raised to power 3. So we now say the one on top, which is b raised to power 3 divided by 1. Then we separate it with multiplication, and say the one below, 1 over the one below. 1 over a raised to power 3. Anytime you see 1 over a number or alphabet carrying a power, then you can convert that positive, that 1 on top, to negative by removing the 1. So this 1 over a raised to power 3 is the same thing as a raised to power minus 3. Or you just ask yourself, what can I do to get 1 over a raised to power minus 3? It is when you find the inverse of a raised to power minus 3 that you get 1 over a raised to power positive 3. So when you find the positive inverse of it, then you get the negative inverse of 1 over a raised to power 3. You get a raised to power minus 3. So anytime you see 1 over 2 raised to power 2, it is the same thing as, if you want to clear this 1 over, just remove the 1 over and put negative here, so it becomes 2 raised to power minus 2. If you have 1 over 3, if you have 1 over 3 raised to power minus 3, you can clear this 1 over by saying that this is equal to 3 raised to power 3 positive. You can clear the 1 over by saying that this is equal to 3 raised to power, then you convert the power which is positive here to negative. So whenever you remove the 1 over, you convert the power to negative. So that is the simple thing you can do here. So that means that this the A, this one now is going to be b raised to power 3 divided by 1. Anything divided by 1 will give you the same number. So b raised to power 3 divided by 1 will give us the same thing as b raised to power 3. Then 1 over a raised to power 3. If we want to remove 1 over, we change the power to negative, which is now a raised to power 3. We change it to a raised to power minus 3. So this becomes, we put a raised to power minus 3. So this is the answer. So with this, you can now do the second question, or the second number in the assignment. Thank you.